Hello and a very warm welcome to One Slot. Let's begin. The Horn of Africa is one of the most complex and conflicted regions of the world. Though it is a region of strategic importance in the global scheme, it is also one that has for decades been at the center of global attention for all the wrong reasons. You take your pick. You could say protracted armed conflicts, coup d'etats, flawed elections in places like Ethiopia and Uganda, not to talk of the severe food crisis in some of these countries. Now, democratic transition in that region can, at best, be described as a mirage, and violence seems to be growing exponentially. How can a just and lasting solution be found to the conflicts in the region? How can democracy, or at least a semblance of one, be restored? What are the initiatives and obstructions to peace in the region? For this conversation, I'm being joined by Brigadier General Ahamed Mohammed, retired. He has served in a variety of command and staff positions in his 37-year career in the Kenya Defense Forces. His career spanned across a long list of responsibilities. Suffice to say, at some point between 2013 and 2016, the general served as Chief of Staff, Office of Military Affairs, Department of Peacekeeping Operations, United Nations Headquarters in New York, becoming the first Kenyan and African to hold this position following a very competitive international selection process. He is a fellow of the Kenyan Institute of Management and currently serves as the Director of Training and Doctrine Command at the Kenya Defense Headquarters in Kenya. Thank you very much for joining us on One Slot.
Thank you very much, Felicity, for having me.
Let's begin by establishing some parameters, and one of that is the fact the Horn of Africa is described as a position of strategic importance in the global space. Why do you think this is so?
Well, thank you, Felicity. I do fully agree with you that the Horn of Africa is of great strategic importance to the entire world. The placement on the Eastern African coast, and where it is, neighboring Asia, the Middle East countries, makes it very, very strategic. Also, the fact that it sits at the entrance of the Red Sea, the main maritime international route, again, makes it very, very strategic indeed, Felicity.
Let's talk about democracy as part of this conversation today. The democratic transitions in the last 20 years in that region. How would you describe its progress or lack of thereof?
Felicity, this has been very challenging for the Horn of Africa, just as it has been indeed for Africa, in the sense that in the countries of the region, namely Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Eritrea, Sudan, and Uganda, very few have seen a very successful democratic process. They have almost always been challenged from a point where before elections is a crisis, at the point of elections is a crisis, and after elections it's a crisis. And therefore, it has been quite a scene in terms of democracy and transition in this part of the world, Felicity.
Let's talk about how it is in these regions. We know for a fact that protests, demonstrations, popular ones, are oftentimes forced by autocratic rulers, so to speak, to leave office. They've succeeded in many instances, but we also know that there are instances where these protests, these quest for the democratic process to go smoothly, is met by brute military force. Why do you think African democracies are dismissive of such collective efforts to entrench democracy?
Indeed, the biggest challenge for us in the region is the lack of trust among the governance and indeed the citizenry. More so because once one wins the elections, it's a winner take it all. And when that happens, then the opposition is left in limbo. And again, we have very powerful presidencies where once in the position, he is driven much more by his own desires, his own people, and not really serving the entire populace. And therefore, it turns out that it's a very lucrative position. And the fact that most of them, indeed, don't actually serve the interest of the population. They serve their own interest and their cronies. And therefore, once the elections are called, before the elections, in most instances, is a crisis. At elections is a crisis. And after elections, it's almost always a crisis, because once a sitting president sees the element that he may lose, he's not sure of his life after presidency. And therefore, he'll do everything possible to stay in power. He'll do everything possible to change the constitution to ensure he stays in power. And he'll do everything possible to delay the elections, or, if possible, not conduct any elections at all in these countries. As you can see, and then we go one by one. For instance, Kenya is a good example. Kenya has done very well. Kenya, in fact, after multi-party democracy in Kenya, we've always had elections every 5 years. And it's clear that the presidency is there only for 2 terms or 5 years. So far, we have done very well. We have had the term of President Moi leaving, Kibaki coming in, served the 2 terms. President Uhuru is there now, he's having 2 terms, elections are this year, and he's leaving. Now, going across to Somalia, it has been a crisis. Even last year, we couldn't hold elections. In Ethiopia, when they were called and the change came in, it was a crisis. In Sudan, you can see what is going on now. It is chaos after the coup that took place. In Uganda, another country, Museveni has been there for the last 36 years. There's no hope for somebody taking over. Or is he willing to allow for a strong opposition? It's a very worrying case, Felicity. Tanzania is promising. They have done very well over the years. They have had their 2 terms of presidency and left in a very good manner. And we see Tanzania being very stable, just like Kenya, a bit of stability in those regions. Thank you, Felicity.
Yeah, you did make some points there. There is some progress when it comes to, our quest for democracy, entrenching it. Your position is actually captured in the book titled The Real Politics of the Horn of Africa. The author, Alex Dewell, delved into the business of politics in this region. He attempted to put a historical spin to how politicians, generals, and insurgents bargain over money and power and use the war that they bring about in their countries to achieve their goal. My question would be, why do you think this persists? Why this a fear of redundancy after the enjoyment of power? Is there maybe a plan we can come up with to make sure that these people don't see the position of authority as a due or a lifetime acquisition?
That has been very, very challenging for us. One is the fact that the office goes with a lot of goodies and privileges. And therefore, once you get in there, you want to stay on, to enjoy the privileges of office, in the fact that everything rests with you. You're the alpha and the omega in that country. You decide almost everything with nobody else once you come in. Now, secondly, we have the element of those who are trying to ouster you. They'll use every means possible. Every means possible. The use of arms, the use of money, the use of using your plan to try and bring you in. All that is being used by others to try and challenge you. Therefore, the incumbency will always do everything possible to ensure he stays in office. Now, as opposed to the West, where you find sitting presidents after their term enjoying a very good life. In this part of the world, it has been challenging because very few have had to leave office and have peace after leaving office. I think so far it's only again in Tanzania and Kenya where we have sitting presidents who have left office in a very humble way, following election.
No, but if I may interject, there are provisions for presidents after they have served their term. I mean, presidents, I'm sure, are entitled to pension, health care, and certain privileges. So is it that it is not that these afterlife in office is catered to, but that it is more the sense of power that they have? I'm trying to get to the point where I'm asking you, is it possible to begin to do like a swift or a gentle shift of mentality where these people are concerned?
Felicity, the challenge has been the crimes and ills that you have committed while in office. Remember, you have run for elections. You have had to deal with your opponents. You have had, even at some point, to kill some individuals to remain in office. At the same time, you have been involved in a lot of corruption. You have been able to rule by virtue of cronies who surround you, and therefore, you're involved maybe in land grabbing and all that. There are so many ills that you have committed that will follow you after the elections, after you leave office. Because of that, you don't die in office as opposed to leaving office. Only in a few countries where, as you say, I like what you say, the terms after you leave office are very good, as seen in Tanzania and Kenya. Very, very good parts. You have a house, you have security, you're sure of your escort and all that. In those two countries, very good examples. In others, again, because of the times in office, you find it very hard to leave office. If you've been in power for 36 years, Felicity, to stay there wasn't easy. To stay there, you've done so many things that actually don't work well for others. And then there's fear of life after office, Felicity.
Yeah, but what the question remains, yes, they are afraid of the crimes or things that they have done while in office. That's a stretch of a conversation on its own. But I want to look at another angle. As much as we have internal issues like the crimes or things that they do when they're in office, there is also a strong argument that the region, as it were, remains volatile due to the role being played by certain actors who engage these kind of crisis in the region for their own benefits. I want you to speak on that, because if these people that are becoming authoritarian don't have any kind of support, they wouldn't have the impetus to keep sabotaging the will of their people, would they?
Well, for a long time, we have argued that the West has had a hand in supporting authoritarian regimes in this region. But I want to assure you that times have changed. Times have changed. And where countries have felt it necessary to run through a constitutional review and allow for transitions, allow for terms for the presidency, it has been quite easy. In the past, I agree with you, there have been external powers that have been supporting the presidency, to have them in office, even against the will of the people. Times have changed. Times have changed now. In fact, that support from the external right now is very limited. Look at the situation in Sudan, for instance. It has been struggling for a long time. On their own, although al-Bashir was there for a long time and he had to leave after a coup. Yes, after a long time, he had to leave. The support that he had was mainly from cronies within the government, allowed him to stay on, against the will of the population. Look at Ethiopia. Ethiopia has tried very much. In fact, in the last 3 presidencies, they have done very well indeed. And even Abiy now today is about to call for election. It didn't happen last year. The crisis now has affected the process of that election. Look at Somalia. Now, Somalia, a bit challenging. A bit in the sense that Somalia is a bit influenced by a few powers. In fact, today, what you may call the Saudi Emirates axis against the Turkey Doha axis has not played well for Villa Somalia. So the presidency is in a crisis. At the same time, remember, Somalia is not one per se as it is today. The presidency has no control outside Villa Somalia. Jubaland, Somaliland are all independent entities. And they require time before they can really bring that act in order. What you're saying is, for Somalia, the best answer is let the Somalis handle their own problem and find a way around that. In Uganda, the presidency has been there for a long time. It has been really very, very autocratic. It has been the use of force. It has been really oppressing the opposition. And that has not been very nice for the country. We hope in the near future there will be need for a free, fair elections, and the president will give way for a new regime to come in. We are told now of a possible change of constitution to allow for a parliamentary system as opposed to a presidential system. Again, it may call for a crisis and more crisis in Uganda. Wish them well indeed.
General, you've made some really strong points there. And the more you talk, the more I think about certain specific countries that I will not be mentioning at this point, whose internal rivalry is also exacerbating the situation in the region. But let's go on a short break now. When we come back, we'll stop the conversation looking for solutions, ways we can improve peace in the region of the Horn of Africa. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. You know, you're still with us, you're still watching One Slot, and we are looking at the Horn of Africa, democratic transition, violence, and security. We still have our guest, Brigadier General Ahamed Mohammed. Thank you very much for staying with us. Let's just go ahead and ask, looking inward for lasting solution, has the regional institutions played any significant role in helping to stabilize or enhance security in the region? That's actually your specialty, so I know you have a lot to say.
Well, thank you very much, Felicity. Yes, there have been a number of institutions that have actually tried to assist in terms of the transitions in this region. One, of course, is the African Union, which again is hosted in one of our countries in Ethiopia. And the African Union has played a key role in terms of trying to address the issues that are facing the countries in the region. You know very well that they have sent a team to Ethiopia to try and look at the conflict with the Tigray and the government. They have tried to intervene in the situation in Sudan as much as possible. And they have also actually tried to intervene in the situation in South Sudan, where we're still having challenges between the main parties to the conflict in South Sudan. Now, the other party of interest within the region, of course, is the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, which again is based in Djibouti, in one of the countries in the region, that's played a key role in terms of addressing issues of conflict in the region, and also in terms of addressing the issues of elections in the region. For quite some time, they have played a key role in terms of addressing the issues of the conflict in South Sudan. In fact, the lead in the process in South Sudan is actually IGAD. They have played a role in interventions in Ethiopia, a very key role also, again, intervening on the current ongoing crisis. And they have also played a role in the other countries of the region in terms of intervening at the summit level, the presidential level, to try and provide some solutions to the crisis in the region. Other than that, of course, the third element is the Eastern African Community, which again has played a key role in terms of addressing conflict in the region. And you know that for major crises, the Eastern African Community has got what we call Eastern African Standby Force, which is on ground in the respective countries, headquartered in both Nairobi and Addis, and then to assist in the event of a military crisis in any of the countries of the region. Of course, we know very well that at the global level, the UN has been very active in the region, currently in Somalia, in South Sudan, in Sudan itself, and has been able to try and pacify the situation and bring order in the region. Back to you, Felicity.
Okay, I want to speak on African Union specifically. They seem to be struggling when it comes to enhancing security in the region. I want to ask, what would be your honest assessment of their effort in trying to ensure peace is in the region?
Well, for the African Union, I want to say that they have indeed tried very hard in terms of addressing issues, but they are, of course, challenged, as you did indicate, because we have, again, a very powerful presidencies in countries, some that don't even actually sometimes follow the direction of the African Union. But the African Union has actually tried their best in terms of addressing the issues. They have always sent emissaries to go and address issues in different countries. They have sent the panel of the wise, made up of past presidencies, to address issues. Of course, they have challenged the area of finance, not very strong indeed, in supporting their programs. They challenged in the area of undertaking peacekeeping as an independent entity, again, because of lack of support from member states and also financial issues. But let me say that in one area, the EU has done very, very well. We have seen that in the past, the UN has been slow in responding to conflict in Africa. I want to say very, very strongly that the African Union has come out very well. Despite the limited resources, despite the ability, they have always come in time to address the challenge before any other external partner has come in. Remember the situation in Mali, they came in very fast. Remember the situation in Central African Republic, they came in very fast. Late, but they did come in. Remember the situation in Somalia, where they came in pretty early. So they have always come in, try to solve the situation at the initial stage, and then gone with what you call rehatting. The UN takes over after they are ready for that respective action. For that, I understand the African Union for coming in and responding in time before the crisis escalates to that level. Thank you.
You seem to have a lot of faith in what the AU has been, the efforts they have been expending towards securing the continent. I spoke to a guest on one slot a while back who doesn't seem to have so much, Mr. Matsanga, Dr. Matsanga actually. He doesn't seem to have a lot of enthusiasm when it comes to the work of the AU in securing the region per se. But my question will align to what areas do you think maybe the AU needs to step up when it comes to dealing with undemocratic governments in the region?
Well, in that regard, Felicity, I want to say that the AU has a bit relaxed and tried to avoid issues that may lead to crisis with itself. And indeed, part of the current challenges in terms of autocratic governments have not received that beating from the AU. AU has been very reluctant, very diplomatic in addressing these issues, and in fact, in advancing issues of democracy by talking to those autocratic regimes. And remember also that part of that is because of the respect of borders and also respect and sovereignty of the independent countries. In that regard, I want to say the AU has to play a bigger role. They are doing very well in terms of being the big brother, in terms of coming in to talk to sitting presidents, in terms of advising them, in terms of finding solutions to autocratic regimes. On that, I can say we're on the lower end.
Yeah, well, there's, I know this a little bit off the focus of the conversation, but I needed to get your perspective on it. You acknowledge that they're a bit hesitant when it comes to some of these governments, and that is because some of these undemocratic governments came in using the instrument of the Constitution. They first of all amend the Constitution and they get in there. Is there a way the AU can, get involved here? It's tricky, quite all right, but is there something they can do other than advice? Maybe some sort of sanction?
Let me say, Felicity, that the AU's hands are tied. Remember, constitutions are driven by the people. As much as you may find a sitting president change the constitution to suit his own interests, at the end of the day, it boils down to the fact that the constitution is driven by the people. As long as you are in office by virtue of the constitution, it becomes very challenging for the AU. Where the AU may come in is where a sitting president may not comply with the provisions of the constitution to suit his own interests. But you find in most instances, constitution, they pay on the constitution, they review the constitution to suit their own interests. In so doing, I want to indeed put it very well, that sometimes they force it on the masses and have what they want. Now, again, by virtue of respect, of sovereignty, respect of the will of the people, it becomes very hard for the AU to come in. But where a president, for instance, loses elections and then wants to stay on after losing, the AU has been very strong in that regard, in calling for the current incumbent to leave office to allow for a smooth transition in that regard. But on the wider side, they still challenge in terms of what they can do in terms of challenging sitting presidents. Thank you.
All right. I was thinking so much about what you were saying, and I'm going to ask that we take a short break. And when we come back, I want us to look a little away from the AU and their efforts and what they're doing. We're going to be looking a little at those who perpetrate violence during elections. We're looking at how we can entrench democratic transitions, why they are not being adequately punished. After this break, stay with us. You are watching News Central. Before I go to my guest, I want to quickly tell our viewers, you can watch our conversation on constitutional coup in Africa. We've had that on one slot. Just find News Central on YouTube and try and follow that conversation so we can focus on the Horn of Africa with our guest, General Mohammed. All right, let's come to those that perpetrate violence during election. What would you say is responsible for our inability to prosecute these people to the full extent of the law, to serve as deterrents to others? Because it seems not just in the Horn of Africa, across Africa.
Well, that's a very valid point, Felicity, in that most of our elections have seen violence across the region. And the violence either perpetrated by the regime in power or those seeking to be in power. But most of the times, it lies with the regime in power, in the sense that the regime in power will use its means to ensure that they retain that power. Now, in doing that, once they're through the elections and they have won, it's expected that they should deal with those who actually perpetrated those crimes. There are cronies who did that. And again, the instruments of justice, the wheel doesn't turn as should be the case. And you find that they will actually slow down the process, and eventually perpetrators actually end up free people, which is very, very wrong. Now, for those who are in the opposition, some of them may be involved, but not to the extent that is being done by the regime that is in power. Therefore, my point will be that the regime in power is the one, the first port of call to address the issue of violence in elections. If they can put the act together, they can definitely control, because they control the instruments of power, remember that. And the opposition has little in that regard to do with that, to play. Therefore, let's fair play during the elections. Let's have everybody playing their rightful role. Let's have a proper and independent elections board to oversee these things, and all be done in a very transparent manner.
Would this be across region, or do you think that dealing with electoral violence and those who break the law should be done within the context of each individual country?
Tracy, unfortunately, the countries themselves are not able to deal with the perpetrators as required. Remember, as I said, where it is the government that's undertaking those actions, the government cannot turn back and deal with those who are its supporters. Where it is done by the opposition in this regard, then they are able to do that. But in most instances, the actions are undertaken by the regime in power. What does that mean then? It requires that an external arm should come in and prompt the government to deal with the perpetrators, which in any case is the government who control the instruments of power which they use on their own population.
May I ask your suggestion for this external arm that will come in? Because it's quite tricky. We did say something earlier about the African Union and the constraint that they have with constitutional coup. So these external powers, what kind of powers would they have really to enforce the law in a sovereign republic?
Now, one of the key elements during elections in the entire region is the presence of observers. These are independent observers from different organizations, from the UN, from the AU, from other regions, who come in and observe the entire process. And they make their reports. Where there is complete chaos, they'll report that in that regard. Where there is crimes committed by the government and regime, they'll report that. And where there are issues underlying issues that are actually causing this, they'll report on that. Let me say, for instance, for the AU, again, we have seen no instance where the AU has come to intervene on electoral violence and done something substantial that can say, well, they have done something good. What may create some fear and call for action is maybe the ICC. We saw the case in Kenya. The ICC played a very key role after the elections in dealing with the key perpetrators, the key leaders perpetrating the conflict. Although at the end of it all, we didn't see very good results coming out of it, again, because of interference by those states with the ICC process. But ICC is one of the very important elements that can do this. If the AU has a similar organ that can do what the ICC is doing, that would be very much appreciated.
All right, still looking inward for solutions, can there be maybe an internal collective security mechanism that can address the challenges? We know that political transitions are ongoing in different parts of the region. Is it possible for there to be something that's region-wide when it comes to security?
Yes, as I said earlier, with the reference to the Horn of Africa region, the two entities, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, and the Eastern African Community have done very well in terms of addressing security issues in this region. I remember sometime last year when the IGAD summit met in Juba, trying and address the problems in South Sudan. I know also they have been able to visit Somalia with a similar team to try and resolve the conflict in Somalia. With regard to Sudan, I believe IGAD already taken some action now address the issue in that area. IGAD, therefore, has done very well in terms of addressing the issues of conflict and transition in the region. For the East African community, these are the countries of Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi and South Sudan. Again, very close neighbors, very good friends, and they have been at the summit level, again, been able to address issues of concern across the region and try and find amicable solutions to the conflict in the region. I'll say both have played their part in terms of the underlying issues and trying to find common ground to address the issues in the region.
You mentioned communities, and we know that citizens are at the center of all of this conversation, their care, their welfare, and all of that. But there's been instances where citizens seem to, we have recent cases in Guinea, I think, celebrating the emergence of coup leaders, military coup, for instance, that are taking over their country. While they can't really often everybody come to the table to sit and have a conversation as to the way forward for the country, but can they play a different role to help the leaders who are actually trying to look for solutions?
Felicity, I come from a military background. I don't ascribe to military coups. There are better ways to address issues in those respective governments. But where you have a situation where the population actually supports a coup, then definitely there is a problem. The challenge is where you have a president in power for 40 years, where you don't have free and fair elections, where you don't have an inclusive governance, where you don't have, where you have issues of poverty, unemployment, and all that. And yet there's no change in the lives of the people. Felicity, there comes a point where it is a point of no return. And the citizenry will rise. Remember, there are two options. One is a coup. A secondary is where the citizenry will rise against the population, the government. If they find it easier to do it through the military, they will do it. But what we should be seeking is actually ways and means of advising our leaders in the region that, as you said, there's life after power or presidency, and that they should really be able to live amicably after a short term, allow others to come in and allow the will of the people to prevail, and then be governed by people whom they wish to have in the lead. Let them be governed a constitution that they are willing to apply to the country. Let them be really driven by their own desires and how they want to govern themselves.
I mean, I want us to move on, but I must take your thoughts quickly on the conversation around defining what democracy really should be. I mean, we just talked about coup and citizens accepting it. Is it possible for us as a people to begin to maybe redefine how we want to see our democracies? Maybe the kind of democracy that we grew up with is not working for the region, and we need to define it the way we understand it. What's your thinking?
Felicity, way back in my school days, I was advisor of democracy from the American simple definition: the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. As simple as that. That it is them who decide how they want to be governed. It's them to decide who will govern them to decide how they want to be governed. I want to say very clearly that this has been misunderstood in Africa, totally misunderstood in Africa. In Africa, we believe that holding elections, improper elections, unfair elections, poor elections, and we call it democracy. We say it's the will of the people. That is where we go wrong. In fact, our democracy has been wanting. Our democracy is very far from standards. And I want to say very clearly that I'm yet to see a country in Africa where proper democracy prevails, where the will of the people prevails, where the government or the people are in comfort with the government, where the people go through their daily lives with no issues at all, and where the government is serving the interest of the people, where the government is fair, where the government is inclusive of everybody, not a winner take it all. Where after elections, we can talk to each other and find how best to develop.
I second that, and I'm very sure everybody watching seconds that, believe that that is the way to go. Let's quickly look at concretes now. Earlier, we talked about the individual interests that fuel conflict. How imperative is it that Africans and African partners engage and find a way to reconcile their competitive economic and security interests in the quest for peace?
As somebody said, Felicity, it's purely the issue of interest. The issue of interest both in government and the external partners. Very few external partners come in the interest of that state. They come in to address their own interests. And we are still to find a situation where we have that balance between the government and the external partners in terms of advancing, as we say, the common interest of the people and the country. That has been very, very challenging. Even donor partners coming in has been very challenging. Remember, you have countries where in one country, you have three partners coming in, all driving different interests in the same country, and becoming very challenging. The issue of the West and China now, again, very challenging for us, all being driven by their own interests. We are told that it used to be colonized by the West. Now China is coming in, colonized in a different way. Of course, we can see it is through development at the initial stages, yes, but not to be the future.
So how do we now, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but how do we now define who a democratic partner is? Because everybody has their interest. So should the interest of the, should we weigh the interest and the level that each has in relations to what will benefit the people? Or is it possible to see people we call democratic partners who are indeed democratic partners?
First, that is a challenge. Remember, we don't sit as Africa and decide who we'll deal with. That decision rests with each independent country. Each country will decide whom to call in as a partner. And on that, we are varying. We are different. And that's why for a long time we have said is the issue of French colonies, the European colonies, China coming in now. Now, again, it boils back to the same point I said earlier. Purely the issue of interest. Who really will come out and say, I'm coming in for interest? Is driven by what do I stand to gain from what you have? Remember, the rich African resources, the rich African minerals in Congo today. Why is Congo in crisis? Why is Western Congo not really being governable? Same issues. That you come in with interest is challenging. Again, the issue lies with governance, Felicity. It is the government to find the right partners. But in doing that also, I would say one thing. Our countries cannot rely permanently on dependency syndrome. We must find a way of managing within our means. In so doing, you are able to contain and address your own national interests. This has been too long. We've been relying on others. It can't go on like this. We must put our act together. We have resources, and we have seen this very well. I was in Rwanda the other day. I was very impressed with what President Kagame has done. Wonderful, very impressive, with the limited support from outside. With what you have, good governance, good people who will support you, and you work together, Felicity, we can get there.
Just before I go to the next question, I'd like to share with our viewers, there is something the General mentioned, and that is dependency syndrome. We've had that conversation as well here on One Slot. If you'd like to expand your thinking on it, you might want to watch it and get the perspective of our guest on that particular episode. Coming back, I want you to speak quickly. We're almost out of time, but I want you to talk about the Horn of Africa Cooperation. That's a body that's proposed by the Eritrean, Ethiopia, and Somalia presidents sometime in 2020. It's going to be in addition to, unions like the AU. There's been some controversy around this, but do you think there might be some merit in this Horn of Africa creating their own specific union, considering as well that Ahamed got an award for what he did with Eritrea in his time? So is there some merit here?
Well, yes, that is coming up. Again, we can't stop individual countries coming together to form their independent union. And the only issue there is that parallel line. That line from Somalia through Djibouti, Somalia through Ethiopia to Eritrea is very worrying. Where do you leave Djibouti in this case? Where do you leave Kenya and Sudan, the other neighbors on the east? Initially, it was felt that it was driven by interests at that time. But remember, again, it was trying to particularly resolve the issues that are facing Somalia, because various partners were trying to come in and find a way of solving the problem in Somalia. And therefore, it's a good opportunity for President Abiy to try and come in and call the two brothers to try and resolve the issue. For President Ezewuike, for a long time, he has been out in the cold. Eritrea has faced a lot of challenges. It's time for him, therefore, to come in and make a mark. And we see him having come in very strongly in support of that trial to form that alliance. Now, with what is going on in Tigray, again, very challenging. And remember, it is being claimed that Ezewuike is very much supporting Abiy in terms of crisis in Ethiopia. Again, if that will work for them, it is good, but it should be something that will work for the entire region, not for them alone. But of course, the first port of call and the first challenge for them and the first measure of their success is finding a permanent solution to the crisis in Somalia. That's what the testing ground is. Should they find something in that regard and solve the Somalia crisis, they will say, yes, they have done it, it's successful, we can expect more of such coalitions in the near future.
All right, in trying to wind down, I want to talk about the people again. When you talk about democracy and the quest for it, there is this hope that is around it. There is hope that, they will be able to build peace. But how do you build peace in the midst of a continuous cycle of lost hope among these people from one autocratic governance to another? How do you build peace?
Thank you, Felicity. Let me say that the people of Africa are very good. We have very good citizens who can be governed very, very well. The people who are very understanding. In fact, should you be able to serve them well, you have no problem. The people, given good governance, have no issues at all. In fact, very understanding. The challenge still remains, unfortunately, the issue of governance, the issue of inclusive governance, the issue of a governance that serves the people across board, across ethnicities, a governance that is not corrupt, a governance not involved in amassing resources for their own good, and a governance that is driven by the wish and desire of the people. Where you do that, you'll find that governments do very well. In fact, even in Africa, where you do that, you find the government doing very well. In Botswana, for instance, very wonderful. Look at that. Good governance. Look at the elections are done in time, as decided. Presidents come and go. They leave after that peacefully, and there are no issues at all. You know, a very good model for Africa. Look at Rwanda.
That would be a very good position to wrap up the conversation today. Thank you very much, Brigadier General Ahamed Mohammed, retired. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you much, Felicity, and good to have me on your forum today. Thank you very much.
Do enjoy the rest of your day. Now, one of the many things I'll quickly say I take away from this particular conversation is that much remains hinged on the desire of the people for lasting peace, the will of the Horn's political elites, and across Africa, their capacity for dialogue, compromise, and reform. And lastly, the determination of the leaders of the continent to be firm in support of panacea for lasting peace. I hope you enjoyed the conversation like I did. I thank you very much for watching. And adios for now. I'll see you again soon.